Hello, everyone. This is the 243rd episode of Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. For this episode, I welcome back Brazilian journalist Mr. José Inácio Werneck as we discuss the Brazil national team during the 1986 World Cup. Mr. Werneck is a journalist, lawyer, interpreter, translator, writer, and a triathlete. Welcome back, José Inácio.
Hello, Sean.
So let's go back in time. What was the state of Brazilian football as we come to the year 1986, and what had been the important changes since the 1982 World Cup?
It was a state of confusion because by that time, Tele Santana had left after the World Cup in 1982. He had gone to Saudi Arabia. Zagallo also had been in Saudi Arabia, had come back. Zagallo had come back, been coached at Flamengo, then Botafogo. And Zagallo clearly, at that point, Zagallo was making evident, obvious that he wanted again to coach Brazil. He was even already saying what kind of players he was going to call for Brazil. He was saying that he didn't want to call what who he considered to be cold players like Socrates. And Tele, meanwhile, had been for 2 years in Saudi Arabia, had come back to Brazil, was again appointed coach of the Brazil team after Evaristo de Macedo, because when Tele left in 1982, Evaristo de Macedo, I don't know whether you remember Evaristo de Macedo, he was a very good center forward for Barcelona. He originally played for Flamengo, and he would have been called for the World Cup in 1958, but Barcelona didn't allow him at that time. No, the clubs would say, no, not going to release him. So he didn't go to the World Cup in 1958, but he was a very good center forward. Anyway, so Evaristo Macedo had been coaching Brazil, but not very successfully. Julito Coutinho, who was then the president, again appointed Tele Santana to be the coach for Brazil for the qualifying of the World Cup. But after that, Tele had left again, and Tele actually had said that he didn't want to go to the World Cup as a coach in 1986. He wanted to go as a TV analyst. He was not looking forward to having the job again. And at that time, it was a contentious period in Brazilian football because Julito Coutinho's term at the Brazilian Football Federation, CBF, was coming to an end. And there was going to be an election for the new president in January 1986. And Medrado Dias was the candidate for the Julito Coutinho group. And the other group had a guy from São Paulo, Nabi Abi Shedid, and Otávio Pinto Guimarães, who had been the president of the Rio de Janeiro Federation. And it was a very contentious period. And what happened is that in the end, apparently, most of the candidates wanted Tele, but Tele didn't want to go. In the end, Otávio Pinto Guimarães became the president. It was a very confusing election. He was the candidate to be the vice president. At the last moment, he was made the candidate to be the president because he was older than Medrado Dias, who was the candidate of the opposition. And the rules said that in case of a draw, the older candidate would get the job. So in the end, Otávio Pinto Guimarães was made president of CBF, chose Tele Santana, asked him, he accepted, and he was again coaching Brazil. And I must say, Tele Santana was very popular with the Brazilian supporters, even though of the dramatic situation, dramatic conditions in which Brazil lost in 1982 to Italy, 3-2, you must remember that. People still wanted Tele Santana. Opinion polls showed that he was vastly preferred over Zagallo by the Brazilian supporters because people thought that Zagallo was too defensive and they liked more the Tele Santana style of open attacking football.
So Brazil were somewhat disappointing under Carlos Alberto Parreira in the 1983 Copa America. Yeah. He was followed by Zico's brother Edu Antunes for like a few matches in 1984.
And then came Evaristo.
Yeah, exactly. And Evaristo, it was in the first half of 1985, and yeah, that was a disappointing spell, and this is what led to the dramatic return of Tele Santana as the savior. And
Yes.
was this exactly what the public demanded why he was selected at the time?
Yes, because yeah, as I said, the supporters vastly preferred Tele to Zagallo. There was a opinion poll that showed, by more than twice the number of votes, people wanted Tele Santana and not Zagallo as the coach for the 1986 World Cup. And Tele would say, no, no, I want to be a TV analyst and all that. But in the end, he accepted the job.
Brazil were now in somewhat new territory as a number of the 1982 stars were in the Italian Serie A, and in the past, these players would have been discarded. Tele
Yeah,
Santana's return meant their return as well. How
yeah.
was this new situation in Brazilian football viewed?
No, people wanted those players. Some of them, were not in very good shape, like Falcão, but Cerezo and others who were playing in.
Junior was very good in Italy.
Yeah, people still liked them. People still liked those players, who had been in 1982. Another player who had been in 1982, Zico, was still very popular with the Brazilian supporters. But Zico was not in good shape. Zico was having problems. It was a kind of a drama. The Zico participation in the 1986 World Cup was kind of dramatic, leading up to that penalty he lost in the match against France.
So before Santana's arrival under Evaristo de Macedo, Brazil had lost a number of friendlies against Colombia, against Peru, among others. And this is one of the reasons why, and Chile, and this is what led to Santana being reappointed. Uh,
Yeah.
can you walk us through the 1986 World Cup qualifiers that in the end Brazil qualified without much difficulty, but were certainly not as impressive as the 1982 qualifiers?
Yeah, because Brazil was in a period of transition, because of all these changes in coach. You mentioned Evaristo and Carlos Alberto Parreira and Edu Antunes, what they call the seleção, that represented Brazil, the Brazil team. It was not really very settled at the point. Lots of changes, new players appearing. That was a period of transition for Brazil at that time. The select team of Brazil, what we Brazilians call seleção.
And in the qualifiers, they won their first two away games 2-0 at Bolivia and at Paraguay. And then they qualified with a 1-1 tie at the Maracana against Paraguay. And the last match was a dead rubber. Again, that was a 1-1 tie at Sao Paulo against Bolivia.
They had beaten Bolivia in Santa
Yeah.
Cruz de la Sierra, if my memory
Yes, 2-0. Yeah.
correct. But then they tied in São Paulo at the Morumbi Stadium.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The new generation of Brazil was exemplified by Careca, who had just missed out in the 1982 adventure in the last minute. You had the likes of Walter Casagrande, Alemão, Branco, and Moser, among others. How
Yeah.
was this new generation viewed by the public?
Players like Careca, well, Careca, as you said, could have played in 1982. He was not all that new, but still, in terms of the Brazil national team, he was new. And Casagrande were very much liked by the people in Brazil at that time. There was a lot of hope in this new generation. The Brazil team was not very settled, but people thought there were good players, and also there were the players who had been in Europe and could come back.
As the year 1986 started, Brazil would have been among the favorites as always. But was there a feeling that this group was not as group as the 1982 one, as a lot of those same players were now much older and injured, etc.?
Yeah, specifically Zico. Zico, at that point, people thought that Zico would not make it to the World Cup because of knee problems that he had. It was almost certain at some point that he would not go to Mexico in the World Cup. The other players, like they were players coming on, like Elzo, who played in midfield. There were some new players, but Miller, another player, Julio Cesar as the center back. People were hopeful that Brazil could do well.
In 1985, Zico, Socrates, and Falcao had returned to Brazil from Italy. Was
Yeah.
their return a boost to Santana in the preparations for the squad?
For him, said Zico, Falcão, and so these were
Yeah.
Tele's favorite players. They had always been. Everybody knew that.
The preparation for the World Cup included a disastrous tour of Europe where
Yeah.
Brazil lost to West Germany 2-0 and 3-0 to Hungary. Though Zico made a triumphant return in a match against Yugoslavia where he scored a hat trick in a 4-2 win.
Was
But
back
that
in
was at
Brazil,
home.
right?
Yeah.
That the game was back in Brazil. The game
Yeah,
against
yeah. The Yugoslavia match was in Brazil. But
yeah.
getting back to the European tour, did that damage Brazil's status as a favorite? And how were these preparatory friendlies regarded in general?
Well, from what I remember, people at the time still thought Brazil could win. Brazil, I don't remember who said that exactly, but Brazil and France were appointed as the favorites to win. I believe by the German press, were appointed as the favorite. Brazil was still considered maybe the best team at the time, at the 1986 World Cup, because people didn't really think much of Italy, the world champions at the
Yeah.
time.
And also, the matches in Europe were under very cold conditions, and you have the images of Brazilian players on the bench with blankets covering them and match against Hungary.
Yeah, but there had been matches before. I remember in 1978 when Brazil was getting ready to play in Argentina in the World Cup. It was winter. At the time, it would be winter in the southern hemisphere. And Brazil played West Germany, France, and England in very cold conditions. So I don't think they're playing in the cold. It was a big problem. And many of the Brazilian players at the time were playing in Europe. So I don't think that would be a problem.
Back to Brazil, other matches, there was a win against Peru 4-0, which was the end for Eder. There was another friendly at home against East Germany. Brazil won 3-0, followed by another
The
friendly
team,
against Finland, won
yeah,
3-0. And then there's the match against Yugoslavia. That was Zico's return where he scored a hat trick. Finally, there's a tie against Chile, 1-1.
I
And
think they also played Finland at some point.
yes, they beat Finland 3-0
Yeah,
on April 17th.
yeah.
Yeah. And then there was matches against Mexican club sides once they arrived in Mexico.
Yeah, that was a repeat of what had happened in 1970. They go there with some time in advance to play local teams, get
Right.
accustomed to the altitude. It is important to remember, remind people that Brazil was going to play in Guadalajara, exactly the same place where they had played in 1970. In 1970, they played all their games in Guadalajara
Right.
except for the final. And they were going to play again in Guadalajara at the Jalisco Stadium, which they knew very well. And I remember actually when Brazil played in 1986, they were using not just the same stadium, but the same locker room. All the games, Brazil had exactly the same locker room.
Due to disciplinary and personal issues, 1982 standouts like Eder and Leandro were off the team. Others to miss the cut included Moser due to injury, Dircio, Renato Gaucho, and Sidney.
You said Renato Gaúcho, and this is the crux of the problem. The reason Leandro, on the day they were leaving Brazil to go to Mexico, the day they were flying to Mexico, Leandro announced he was not going to the World Cup. And Zico and Junior went to Leandro's house to plead with him, please come with us. That was because of the incident with Leandro and Renato. They had been caught arriving late at the Brazilian camp at something like 4 o'clock in the morning. They had been spotted by the security. They had been denounced, reported to Tele. Tele was a very strict disciplinarian. And Tele decided to let go both of them. In the end, he changed his mind, accepted that they would come back and play for the team. But apparently there were some other problems with Renato. Renato was considered a little bit of a rebel. And at the last opportunity, when Tele had to announce the players that were going to be cut, he included Renato Gaúcho and Leandro as a solidarity, because Renato had been in solidarity with Leandro, because what happened is that they were supposed to climb the wall and go into the camp without being noticed. But Leandro could not climb the wall. So he had to go through the door. And in solidarity with Leandro, Renato went with him. So when Tele let Renato go, cut him from the World Cup squad. Then Leandro, in solidarity with Renato, decided not to go. So it was a very dramatic situation, and all this exploding on the very day Brazil were leaving by plane to go to Mexico.
And Sydney was also dismissed because he had left training without permission and while he was recovering from injury. Yeah, but he was like a fringe team player, so maybe he may not have made the squad at all. And Eder, he was sent off in the match against Peru for hitting an opponent. And
Yeah.
as a result, Santana excluded him from the squad.
Yeah,
And
Tele
yeah.
Santana had always been very strict about discipline.
Yeah.
Always.
And Edivaldo was called in as a replacement. Yeah, I read somewhere that Leandro, he said that he had also left the team because he did not want to play as a right back and wanted to play as a central defender. Was that also a reason, or is that, I
No,
read that somewhere?
honestly, I don't remember that. I think the whole problem was that he acted in
Yeah,
solidarity
that I remember. Yeah, yeah,
with Renato Gaúcho. Yeah.
yeah. Another thing noticed was that Socrates had lost the captaincy at first to Oscar and then to Edinho in the World Cup. Was there a reason for why Socrates was no longer the captain?
I don't really know, but if there was a reason, I would say it was because of Soccer's temperament. He was a very outspoken player. So maybe, and he had been kind of in contradiction or in got into arguments with the president of the federation, Otávio Pinto Guimarães, and the vice, especially the vice president, Nabia Bichedi, who was head of the delegation in Mexico. And Socrates have given interviews saying that FIFA was making it easy for Mexico and for Brazil to win the World Cup. Nabia Bichedi didn't like that. He had always been considered kind of a rebel. And because of that, there was tension. And because of this, maybe he lost the captaincy.
Just like in our previous podcasts, let's discuss the evolution of Pele. Now,
Yeah.
this is a strange
Yeah.
story. There were rumors that he had suggested that he would be willing to get back in shape, join the Brazilian squad, and get back in shape just to play one half of a match. Is there truth to that?
Oh, to be quite frank, I never heard about that.
Oh, you have?
No, 1986. Well, how old was
He would
Pelé?
have been in 40s. Yeah, he would have been in 40. But yeah, that was the thing. Like,
Yeah,
I read that a couple of places that was,
yeah.
he
Yeah,
had.
that was a Midsummer Night's Dream.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I don't know. He said it
not,
jokingly or how, but that was,
yeah,
I
yeah,
read that a few places.
yeah,
Yeah.
not to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I imagine for this World Cup, he probably would have been as just a correspondent for
Pelé,
matches.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. At that time, he was working as a TV analyst.
Let's look at the final 22 selected by Tele Santana for this World Cup.
Yeah.
For goalkeepers, we have at number one starting goalkeeper Carlos of Corinthians, who'd been a backup in 1978 and 1982.
Yeah.
At number 12, we have Paulo Victor of Fluminense. And at number 22, the veteran Emerson Leao, a veteran of the 1970s, 74, and 78
A
World
noted
Cups.
troublemaker.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
most recent episode was him complaining about Carlo Ancelotti being the coach for Brazil in the 2026 World Cup.
Indeed. Yeah.
Leo has always been like that all his career.
As defenders, at number two, we have Edson of Corinthians. At number three, Oscar of Sao Paulo, veteran from 78-82. Number four, captain of the team, Eginio of Udinese, again a veteran from 78 and 82. At number 13, Josimar of Botafogo.
Very interesting story about Josimar.
At number 14, Julio Cesar of Campinas Garani. Number 16, Mauro Galvao of Internacional. Number 17, Branco of Fluminense. We come to the midfielders at number 5, Paulo Roberto Falcao at Sao Paulo, veteran of 82.
He had come back from Italy. He had problems with Roma. Roma owed him money.
Number 6, Junior, playing in Torino in Italy, veteran of
And now
82.
Junior was playing as a midfielder.
Yeah. Number 10, Zico Flamingo, of course, star of 78-82. Number 15, Alemão of Botafogo. Number 18, Socrates, now at Flamingo, captain of the 1982 team. Number 19, Elzo of Atlético Mineiro, future Benfica player. Number 20, Silas of Sao Paulo. Number 21, Valdo of Grêmio. We come to the strikers at number 7, Luis Miller of Sao Paulo.
Yeah.
Number 8, Walter Casagrande of Corinthians. Number 9, Careca of Sao Paulo. And number 11, Edivaldo of Atlético Mineiro.
When you mentioned Zico, you meant to say he had been a star in 1978 and 1982. No,
Yes,
just
yes.
make it clear. Okay.
Yeah. And of course, of this squad, like we mentioned, Emerson Leao had been part of the 70, 74, and 78 squads.
Yeah.
Carlos, Oscar, Edinho, and Zico were part of the 78 and 82 World Cup squads. And Junior, Socrates, and Falcao were part of the 1982 squad. And from this group, obviously the backup goalkeepers, Emerson Leao and Paulo Vitor, along with Oscar, Edivaldo, Mauro Galvao, and Valdo, would not make an appearance during this World Cup. Also to remember, Mauro Galvao was called in the last minute to replace the injured Carlos Moser.
Yeah.
Tele Santana became the second Brazilian manager to manage in 2 consecutive World Cups after Zagallo in 70 and 74. Brazil would start its World Cup against Spain on June 1st, again at Guadalajara at Estadio Jalisco. And this is a Spain of Emilio Butragueño and many of the Real Madrid players that were dominant at that time. So for Brazil, we have the following squad: Carlos, Edson, Edinho, captain of the team; Julio Cesar, Branco, Junior. He'd be replaced by Falcao in the 79th minute. Alemão, Socrates, Elzo, Casagrande. He'd be replaced by Miller in the 66th minute, and Careca. In this match, there's a controversial incident when Spanish and Real Madrid midfielder Michel's shot hit the bar, and the ball, it bounced down and it clearly had crossed the line per television replays.
Yeah.
But this is before VAR, so the goal was ruled out.
Yeah.
And 2 minutes later, Edinho scored a goal for Brazil, but that was also ruled out. I'm not sure, for some infraction. And finally, in the 62nd minute, Careca's shot struck the crossbar and Socrates headed in the rebound, but he may have been offside.
Yeah.
But the goal stood, and Brazil won 1-0.
Yeah, there was a lot of controversy. That match made worse by the fact that sometime, a few days later, it was reported that Moza de Giorgio, a guy who was, had been a former Brazilian Federation football official, but it was still very much close to the Brazilian Football Federation at the time, had dinner the night before with the Australian referee. Was going to referee the match. The circumstances of the match made it very, people really thought that Brazil, put it in a nice way, Brazil was favored by the referee. Anyway, Spain complained bitterly about that.
A few days later, on June 6th, at the same venue, they face Algeria.
Yeah.
And for this match, we have the following lineup: Carlos, Edson. He'd be replaced by Falcao in the 10th minute. Edinho, captain of the team. Julio Cesar, Branco, Junior, Alemão, Socrates, Elzo, Casagrande. Miller replaced him in the 59th minute, and Careca.
May I say something about that before anything else? Because at some point it had looked like Zico was not even going to go to the World Cup, right? Okay, then in the end, they thought, the doctor at the time thought, no, there will be time for him to recuperate. Let's take him to the World Cup. But as you can see, at that point, when they were in Mexico, Zico got injured again in a practice. So at that point, he was not in the team, and there was not much hope that Zico could play for Brazil in that World Cup. Just to mention this, because in the end, he would have a very important role to play in the World Cup, but he didn't play in that match against Algeria.
We should mention that this was Falcao's last match for Brazil.
Falcão was not in good shape.
Yes, he was injured. Brazil would win this match 1-0. So in the 66th minute, Miller, the substitute, he crossed from the right side and Careca struck in at the far post. And Brazil won 1-0 again and will already qualify to the next round. The final match in this group was against Northern Ireland on June 12th at the same venue. This would be the match of Zico's return. So we have the following lineup: Carlos, Edinho, captain of the team; Josimar, now also a starter, more about him; Julio Cesar, Branco Jr., Socrates, he'd be replaced by Zico in the 68th minute, making his debut in the World Cup; Elzo, Alemão, Miller, who was now the starter, displacing Casagrande, and Casagrande would replace him in the 26th minute, and Careca. Brazil would take the lead in the 15th minute when Miller's cross from the right side was volleyed by Careca. In the 42nd minute, we have Josimar making his debut in the World Cup and scoring with a beautiful long-range shot from outside of the box that kind of cemented his legend in this World Cup.
Josimar became a kind of a dramatis persona, kind of a character in this World Cup because he was only there because Leandro had refused to go, had refused to fly with Brazil to Mexico. Then he was called, but he was a second, not a team player. But in this game, Edson Boaro, who was playing as right back, was injured. So Josimar came, he scored that goal and became a legend.
And much like the Argentine goalkeeper Sergio Goycochea in 1990, he took his opportunity to great effect and played for the rest of the tournament.
Yeah.
And became one of the more famous players of this World Cup.
Yeah.
And just before the end, in the 87th minute, Zico, who had come in as a substitute, he made a combination play with Careca, and Careca scored his second and Brazil's third in this match.
If my memory serves me right, Careca got a backheel pass from Zico.
Yes, and Brazil won 3-0 and won all their matches in this group. No goals conceded.
And at that point, people in Brazil, opinion polls started to say Brazil will win the World Cup. All the confidence that had vanished reappeared. And Brazil, the majority of supporters in Brazil were convinced that Brazil was going to win the World Cup.
In the second round, they face Poland. Now, this is not the same Poland as 1974, 78, or even 82.
If I'm not mistaken, that World Cup had a peculiar format because I think the second round was just one game.
Of the 6 groups, the 4 best third-place teams could qualify to the next round.
Yeah, it's either win or lose. They win, they go forward, lose, they are out.
It was a system that's in place now with a knockout round. So in this round, Brazil play Poland. They have some of the older players like Boniek, but it's not the same team as before. For this match, we have the following lineup: Carlos, Edinho, captain of the team; Josimar, Julio Cesar, Branco Jr., Alemão, Socrates. He'd be replaced by Zico again in the 69th minute; Elzo, Miller. He'd be replaced by Silas in the 73rd minute, and Careca. In the 30th minute, Careca was fouled by Tarasiewicz in the box, and Socrates scored from the penalty kick.
Yeah.
We come to the second half. Josimar, the revelation of Brazil in this World Cup. He received the ball on the right side and went on a solo run and scored from a narrow angle on the right side.
Yeah.
In the 79th minute, on the left side at the edge of the box, Careca backheeled to Edinho on the right, who then advanced to score. So Brazil were 3-0 up. In the 83rd minute, Zico, who had come on, he was fouled by the Polish goalkeeper Józef Młynarczyk in the box, and Careca scored from a penalty kick. And Brazil won comfortably 4-0.
Yeah, and that point, that was what was going on. Pelé was always keeping Zico as a substitute because Zico wanted to play the full game, but Pelé always thought, it is better to keep him in reserve together with on the bench and use him as the game goes on if it's not too difficult, let's put Zico to recover him. He was already thinking about making use of Zico if Brazil reaches the final. So he was being very cautious about Zico, just bringing him on at the end of the games for him just to get into the rhythm.
So now we come to the quarterfinals. On June 21st, at the same venue at Guadalajara, where Brazil played all of its matches during this World Cup.
Yeah, as it
Brazil
happened in 1970.
Brazil faced the European champions France. Now, this is a France containing Michel Platini, the triple Ballon d'Or winner at this point, other stars like Manuel Amoros, Patrick Battiston, Alain Giresse, Luis Fernandez, Jean Tigana, Dominique Rocheteau. So a very good French side.
Yes.
And this match would go down as one of the classics of not only World Cup but world football history.
Yeah, and
So
I remember, Sean, that Tele was very concerned about Platini. And in fact, in one of the practices, he made Zico playing for the reserve team, playing the role of Platini, because he thought that France, they played very well in a block, defensive block, and used the Platini for the counterattacks. And he wanted Brazil to be able to nullify, to control Platini. And he wanted Zico to play this role against the Brazil first team, the players, in a practice for the game against France. And that's what Zico did.
So for this match, we have the following lineup. Now Brazil's standard formation for this World Cup. Carlos, Edinho, captain of the team. Josimar, Julio Cesar, Branco. Junior, he'd be replaced by Silas in the extra time in 91st minute. Alemão, Socrates, Elzo. Miller, he'd be replaced by Zico in the 71st minute. And Careca. Brazil would take the lead in the 17th minute in a brilliant build up to the goal. Went from the right side. Miller passed across to the left to Junior, who passed to the left to Careca to score. And at this point, Brazil were looking headed for victory.
Yeah, they were playing very well at that point.
In the 40th minute, France ties the match when Dominique Rocheteau's cross from the right side was struck in by Platini at the far post.
And Zico was on the bench for Brazil.
Yes. So Zico, like we mentioned, would come on in the second half. There's an incident where I believe Joel Bas, the French goalkeeper, he fouled Branco in the box.
Exactly. What happened was that Zico came on in the second half, and 2 minutes later, he had been on the pitch for 2 minutes. He made the pass for Branco, and the Branco was fouled inside the box. It was a penalty, and that was the problem. Was Zico already warm enough? Was he already in the rhythm of the game to take that penalty? He was the best penalty taker for Brazil. Everybody knew that. But was that a mistake that Zico was? He got the ball. Nobody said anything. He got the ball. He went to take the penalty, and
well, he missed, of course. But funnily, do you remember Branco's reaction after the foul?
I think no, I don't.
So after Bats fouls him in the box, you see Branco laying down on the ground, holding his leg, kind of rolling around. And then as soon as the referee awards a penalty kick, he miraculously recovers and starts raising his hands. So that's
Now I remember. And let me say something. Zico very rarely missed a penalty. The only other penalty I remember Zico missing was in a friendly against the Soviet Union in Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil.
1980.
Yeah. He was excellent at taking penalties. But the problem is, was he already in the rhythm of the game at that point to take the penalty? Well, what is his name? Bats?
Joel
saved.
Bats,
Yeah, saved.
Match ended as a 1-1 tie. We go to extra time. Nothing changes. It's 1-1. But it's such a beautiful game to watch.
Just before the end of extra time, Socrates missed an open goal. He was tired at that point. He was never a player in great physical shape. He used to like to drink. Everybody knows that.
Of course, yeah.
He misses an open goal at the end of extra time before Brazil go to penalty kicks against France.
This game has gone down as one of the most beautiful matches in the history of football. End-to-end action, so many great players that we just mentioned. Unfortunately, such a spectacle had to go to penalty kick shootout, and Socrates missed for Brazil, the first penalty kick for Brazil.
Yeah, he was tired. And I
Yeah.
remember João Saldanha, at the time, João Saldanha, who had coached Brazil in 1970 and was at that time back in his role as analyst, kind of made a speech on the radio. Yeah, he was working for the radio. Say exactly that. Socrates should never have taken that because he was physically exhausted.
Right. He was drained at this point, yeah.
Yeah.
Zico somewhat redeemed his miss during the match by scoring one of Brazil's penalty kicks. For France, Michel Platini missed his attempt too. That
Badly.
was
He
yeah.
missed badly.
But in the end, Julio Cesar missed for Brazil, and then Frenchman Luis Fernandez scored, and France had won 4-3.
Yeah, before Julio Cesar takes the penalty and shoots against the post on the left, on his left, to the right of Pats, there was a penalty for one of the penalties for France.
Oh, Bruno Bellon's penalty kick. Yeah. I remember that
Struck
one.
the post, struck Carlos on his back and went in. And at that time, there was a controversy. Should it have been considered a goal or not?
Yes, I've heard about that. Yeah.
Nowadays it's very clear. It is a goal. But
Yeah.
at that time, I think it was not very clear whether in a situation like that, because people said he took the penalty and he shot against the post, so he missed the penalty. And people said, no, but the ball came back and struck the goalie on the back and went in. It is a goal. People were arguing about that. Nowadays it is clear. It is a goal. But at that time, I remember people saying it should not have been considered a goal. But anyway, Brazil lost to France on penalty
Yeah.
kicks.
For the likes of Socrates, Zico, this was their final match for Brazil. An era was over. Can you discuss your emotion afterwards, the reaction back home that you witnessed personally?
Well, I can tell you my reaction personally. I thought, well, that is it. That is life. Brazil played well given the circumstances. We lost again. We lost with Tele Santana, but what can we do? I still like Tele Santana as a coach. People in Brazil still like Tele Santana as a coach. He would kind of, because there were people in Brazil, mainly Zagallo and some other people, who used to say, Tele is a loser. He has all these nice ideas, but when it comes to the time of the crunch, don't win. But he redeemed himself by winning twice the Club World Championship.
Oh yeah, with Sao Paulo. Yeah.
Club World Championship, beating Barcelona and Milan, two of the most powerful European teams at the time. I think people took the defeat in stride. Well, Brazil lost, that's life.
Yeah, I think there was more emotional resonance for the 1982 loss, perhaps.
There was, yeah, because people liked that team more, and the circumstances were even more dramatic than the circumstances against France. Most occasions, it was a dramatic defeat, but I think in 1982, people felt more deeply hurt than in 1986.
Just like the 1982 match against Italy, this 1986 match against France is considered another classic after more than 40 years. So, how is this match regarded nowadays in Brazilian football folklore?
Yeah, like a classic one of these, not as much as the game against Italy. That game against Italy in 1982 is still regarded as the greatest tragedy, second only to the 1950 final when Brazil lost to Uruguay at Maracanã Stadium. After that, the second greatest tragedy was the defeat to Italy in 1982, and I would say then that this defeat on penalty kicks against France in 1986 would come up third place, in my opinion.
And maybe because perhaps also the 1982 team was at its zenith with players at their peak, while a lot of the 1986 players like Zico or Socrates were coming to the end of the road, perhaps.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you've ever had the chance to interview some of the players who played in this match.
No, not after that game.
Not after that game. But in
But I would
general,
say, I would say if there was a big regret, maybe it would have been Zico's regret in taking that penalty against France. Maybe he thought, well, I really shouldn't, shouldn't have done it so soon after going on to the. I don't know. He never said that to me, but I suspect that.
I imagine the older 1982 players would have been the main scapegoat of this team at that point, if there was any scapegoats. Was it justified, and was Santana ever blamed for taking injured players like Falcao to the World Cup?
No, I don't. I don't think Tele Santana was blamed for that. No, I
Yeah.
would say no.
The likes of Careca, Julio Cesar, and Josimar became revelations for Brazil, while Casagrande, who was tipped to be one of the stars of this World Cup, was in the end a disappointment. What are your thoughts on the successes and disappointments of this World Cup?
The biggest success was Josimar, no doubt. I think Elzo played a good role. He was very controversial at the time whether the Tele should play him as a midfield player. Alemão became successes. So I would say Josimar, Alemão were the success for Brazil in this World Cup. Alemão and
You,
Careca, right? There's Alemão and Careca who would go on and
yeah,
play.
yeah, Alemão,
No, I meant Alemão and Careca.
yeah.
Even though, and that's another story, in 1990, Alemão would be blamed for that goal that Canidia scored
Yeah.
against. But that's another story.
Yeah, because I was going to say about Casagrande, everyone thought this World Cup would be his, but it didn't work out. Yeah,
Yeah,
although
yeah.
he did go to Europe, he went to
Yeah.
Porto, and then Ascoli, I believe, and then Torino. So he did play
He
have a.
had a successful career, not
Yeah.
very top, but a successful career.
How would you compare and contrast Santana's 1982 and 86 squads? Naturally, 1982 is considered one of the greatest ones ever in the history of the game.
Yeah, the 1982 was better than that. If you compare the players, it is a pity that Leandro, even though Josimar played well, Leandro is a very good player. The only difference is that in 1982, Brazil didn't have a good center forward because Careca, in the last moment, was injured, could not play, but he played in 1986. So the advantage of the 1986 team was having Careca, because Careca couldn't play in 1982 and was very much missed in 1982. But altogether, 1982 team is still considered in Brazil better than the 1986 team, and probably by many people one of the two best teams that Brazil ever had in the World Cup.
And a year later, Careca would join Maradona at Napoli and would have a
Yeah,
brilliant career there.
yeah.
Alemão would join Atletico Madrid and then Napoli as well later.
Would go on to play for Brazil in 1990 in the World Cup.
Yes. The failure of Santana's Jogo Bonito for a second consecutive World Cup paved the way for the Lazzaroni and Carlos Alberto Pereira era of defensive solidity.
Defenses of solidity, pragmatic football, emphasis on physical preparation. Yes, all of that.
I think you already said that, but was Santana's reputation damaged after this? And how significant was his Sao Paulo resurgence as a result in the early 1990s?
It was great. People always liked Tele Santana because people always thought that Tele Santana was a kind of a difficult personality, but an honest person. Sincere. And one of the things that always characterized Tele was in emphasis in playing in a clean way. I remember when São Paulo played Barcelona in the what was then considered the World Club Championship in Japan. The night before the game, Tele Santana by chance bumped into Johan Cruyff at the hotel, and they sat together to have a drink the night before the game. And they said, let's play a clean game tomorrow, no fouls. Let's play as cleanly as possible. I remember that story. And São Paulo went on to win the game. That's what was always Tele's emphasis. He wanted people playing offensively meaning playing attacking football and playing cleanly, not making use of tricks, nasty fouls, and wasting time and things. He was football purist. That's how you define Tele Santana.
So, in closing, after 40 years, what is the legacy of this team in not only Brazilian football history, but in Brazil history and culturally? Is it obviously forgotten in comparison to the 1982 team, or does the memory of the match against France keep its memory alive?
Oh yeah, no doubt. That match against France is still very much remembered in Brazil. It was considered a good, not as good as 1980. People didn't have as much hope before in 1982. People were convinced Brazil was going to win before going to Spain. That was not the case in 1986. Before going to Mexico, people didn't really think much about the team. But when the team started playing, especially against Poland and Northern Ireland, people didn't believe that Brazil could again play well and win the World Cup. It was maybe a mistake, a dream, but people still like that team in 1986 and still moan and still, feel sorry about the way that Brazil lost on penalty kicks. And as I said, at that time, there was a controversy. Should that goal scored when the ball bounced off the back of Carlos, should it have been considered a goal or not? But people accepted it.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this
I thank you
interview.
for inviting me.
Thank you. And all our contact information is listed on the blog and podcast uploads. So, Jose Nacho, thank you once again,
You're welcome, Sean.
and hope to continue these discussions on football history.
Yeah, there will be other World Cups, especially one coming this year.
Indeed, indeed.
Okay.
Thank you once again.
Thank you.